I did it! I made a sequence board. So this took months to build and it turned out great, so I'm really happy with it. For the tiles, if you want to see how I made just the tiles specifically, I'm going to be uploading another video at the same time as this one that's specifically just how I made the tiles. But if you want to see how I made everything else and how I assembled it all together, then continue watching. I hope you guys enjoy this video. The next step for this is to remove the pencil lines that I used to mark out the locations on the tiles. To do this, all I do is I take a sanding brick and I sand the tile until the pencil lines are gone. So after I'm done sanding, you can see that there's still a bunch of like little bits of sawdust that build up inside the thing. So I'm just taking a little bit of acetone and I'm just dabbing it on just to clear out all the sawdust from the little crevices on the tiles. Once I've got the tiles all cleaned, the next step is to drill the pilot holes for the screws that I'll be using to hold them down. So every tile needs 2 holes drilled out. So here's my tester tile that I did just to make sure I wouldn't split the tiles when I went to put the screws in. So first I make a 3/32 inch pilot hole with this, and then I come back with a 1/8 drill bit and I make the holes big enough for the screws to go in without splitting the tiles. Many holes later, we're halfway there. So now I've just got to do the 1/8 inch bit and make all of these holes a little bit bigger. Unfortunately, as I go along, you can see some of the tile layers are starting to split off, which, I mean, that's just because I'm using cheap tiles. Hopefully it doesn't happen too much, but once I put the screws in, it should pull this section down and hopefully cover that up a bit. So the next step is to finish the tiles. I'm using a product called Walrus Oil Furniture Finish for that. It's kind of funny because they had to put 100% vegan on the back of this bottle because I think people thought it was actual walrus oil. What it actually is polymerizing safflower and hemp seed oil with a hint of lime. It's I'll be curious to see what the finish looks like, but basically all I do is I wipe some of the oil onto the tiles and then I leave them sit for 24 hours to cure, and then I just keep repeating that process until I get the finish that I want. Here's all the tiles after one coat. You can see on the tiles there's a little bit of blackening that happens around where I did the engravings. I don't know, I think it looks kind of cool. It doesn't show up as well on the video, but it makes it kind of look older-ish. I don't know, that's the best way I could describe it. So here's what it looks like after 1 day of drying. It said on the product container to wipe off excess after the 24 hours of drying, but there's none left, so I'm pretty sure that means it needs a second coat, so I'll do that now and then we'll see what that looks like. Here's the second coat after another 24 hours. You can see some of these tiles are still a little bit oily, so I think that means that it's good. Anyways, I've used like half the bottle and it's supposed to be enough for multiple chairs, so I'm gonna say that's good. So now what I do is I leave it for about a week to fully set up and cure or whatever it does, and then after that I've got one other coating that I'll add to it. Here are the tiles after 1 week of drying. They came out pretty good. The coating I put on, it highlights the grains within the wood a bunch. It's a little hard to see on camera, but yeah, they came out pretty good. So the next step is to add this lemon oil furniture polish. Basically, the reason I'm adding this is it has a UV protectant, so this will keep the tiles from getting degraded by sunlight and having their color change and stuff like that. There we go, 1 coat of polish added. It smells really nice in here now because it's lemon polish, but yeah, there we go. Hopefully that keeps them from getting degraded by sunlight. While the tiles are drying, I've measured out the underside of the board. I've included a little bit extra on all of the sides, you can see. And this is why you should always use the correct tool for the job. Instead of a hacksaw, whose handle is wider than its blade, so you can't cut straight through because you run into the handle, so you have to make 1,000 little squares just to get to the edge you're trying to get to. I do have a way of straightening that out. I just don't want to do it right now because I had to make 1,000 cuts. Voila, much straighter edges. And can you guess how I did it? I went out and bought a jigsaw because it turns out that power tools are much more effective than hand tools at cutting chipboard. The first step of the outside work that I did was to turn an 8-foot 2x2 into 4 23-ish inch lengths. Since a 2x2 is actually 1.5 inches wide and tall, I then measured 1.5 inches back from the edge. I then traced a 45-degree angle from the edge to the 1.5 inch mark, and I cut the board along the 45-degree angle. The next step for making the edge pieces was to trace a straight line along the inside edge of the board that is 1/2 inch from the bottom side, which is basically the thickness of the chipboard. Then I took a chisel, because I don't have the proper power tool, and I chiseled along the line as I've shown in the picture. After that, I took the chisel and I chiseled out a small indent for the chipboard to sit in. I had to make sure I didn't go too deep because I didn't want to cover off too much of the chipboard and then not be able to fit all the tiles on it. After that was done, I then took a rotary tool and cut a bunch of roughly 1-inch strips from a 1.5 inch strip of aluminum. I cut 12 pieces total. These will be used as brackets to hold the chipboard to the frame from the underside, as well as on the corners of the frame to hide the gaps in it. I then filed down all of the edges and corners of the aluminum pieces, as I've shown in the pictures. After that, I marked each of the brackets about 1/4 inch from the edge, and then I took a punch and kind of eyeballed the center of that line, and I punched it for drilling. After that, I took a series of increasingly larger drill bits and drilled out the holes big enough for the screws to fit through them. One note here is that I had to clamp the brackets when I was drilling them out, and I just kind of squished them between 2 junk pieces of chipboard. I had to do this, otherwise they'd spin like crazy and it was a big pain. So then after I drilled them out, the final step was to take a deburring tool and remove all the burrs from the edges of the drill holes. Okay, I'm back inside where I have a camera mount, so now I can show this. To remove the burrs, I just take this deburring tool and I go around removing all the burrs from these pieces. So I gotta do that for all of them. And the base is done and painted black. You can see right here. So now all that I have to do is I have to trim up the side pieces to perfectly fit it, because you can see there's a little bit of a gap right here. And then I've got this aluminum strip that I'm going to cut some brackets out of, because I'm going to have a strip that goes halfway onto this piece of wood and halfway onto the base, because you can't really screw sideways into chipboard. I've also got a couple of other little accessories I'm going to add. I've got these kind of corner pieces that I'll add to make it kind of look a little more finished. I can only put them on one side because they're just long enough that I can't put one on the top and one on the underside because they run into each other. But I think just around the top it'll still look good. And I've also got these little feet that I'm going to put on the underside of this so that it has something to sit on. I fixed the gaps around the sides by taking each board and I shorten them and I cut these little channels into them. So now they fit just a hair over the side of the board. So that should solve that problem. I just did a quick mock-up to see what the underside would look like. So there'll be the aluminum tabs and then there'll be these little feet on the underside. I've also got to figure out a way to get it so that I can know that the top side will be right, because I don't want these gaps, but also you can kind of see that cut isn't straight, so they are meeting on the top, but there's a big gap on the underside, so got some figuring out to do there. I put walrus oil on the edge pieces as well, and you can see, especially on this one, I think it was more designed to bring out the grain of the wood. So this has been sitting for a couple hours since I put the walrus oil on it, and it's coming out really nicely with the grain of the wood. So I think walrus oil is definitely, the tiles, not the best, but I mean, I maybe should have just stained those, but on these edge pieces, especially this one, it's really nice. Now that the edge pieces are done, I can assemble them around the base, and then I can set these pieces on the corners and pre-drill the holes into the edge pieces for the screws to go through. To make sure all the pieces are fitting together as best as they can, because all the cuts are not perfectly straight, I've resorted to just butting it up against the cabinets and pressing it all together. So as I'm going along, I'm just doing one set of edge pieces together. You can see it's just this one and that one that I pre-drilled for now, because I want to make sure that I use each one of these brackets on the corners that I marked using them, because they're all a little bit different. So now I've got to repeat that process for the rest of the sides. I haven't fully tightened these down yet, so these sides aren't totally fixed to each other. There's a little bit of play left in them, and that'll let me get everything lined up as best as I can, and then I'll tighten these down fully so that these two can't move. And voila! After going through and carefully straightening and tightening things down, we now have a frame. And there's the base sitting in the frame. You can see how modern power tools make everything a lot easier, because there's all kinds of little gaps and spaces, but oh well, I used what I had, and I think it's going to turn out really good in the end anyway. I've got the underneath tabs laid out and marked for pre-drilling. I'm not going to be pre-drilling these holes because the screws from the top side are going to come in and I don't know their exact placement. So once I figure that out, then I can adjust these a little bit, like this way or that way, just to miss the screws. So, but if I do the outside edge, then they'll at least hold this roughly in place so I can add the tiles. And there we go, making a mess of the floor, but the base is now attached so it doesn't fall out. Huzzah! Here's a sneak preview of what the board's gonna look like. Now all I gotta do is drill out the holes in the edge tiles now that I've figured out where they're sitting, and then tighten up all these little gaps everywhere and just kind of make it all look pretty, and then attach all the tiles. With the tiles all test fit and in position, now all I've got to do is take the drill and pre-drill a bunch of holes to the depth that I've marked on the drill bit, and then I put the screws in, and then the tiles are locked in place. Time to start drilling. If you're wondering why there's coins along the edge here, it's basically I'm using them as little shims to keep all of the tiles locked in place. They were So there's one row done. Excuse the noise, my upstairs neighbors are redoing the floors, so it's loud. But you can see it has drifted a little bit as I went along, which is a little unfortunate, but it hopefully will turn out great in the end. So first I'm gonna go all the way around the outside, and then I'll do the whole middle. There we go, the outside's done. So that'll make it a lot easier, because going around the outside I can only do one tile at a time drilling it, because the whole thing kind of shifted back and forth. But now I could do, like, I could do 2 or 3, maybe even a whole row, we'll see, drill them all out, and then just follow up with screws, which should be a lot quicker than going around the outside. Half done, but I am out of screws, so I had to order some more. Also, there's a couple of spots where you can see it's kind of bowing up, but it's not a big deal because you can see I can just push it back down and it doesn't mess everything up. Voila, it's complete. I went ahead and put the corner pieces on just to see how it looks, and it looks great. So now all I gotta do is the underside, and then it will be done. All done. Got all the tiles on the top, and it's a little hard to tell, but I got the feet on the bottom. Everything's screwed down, so it's really nice to finally be done this after 4 months. So it turned out really good. I really like how it turned out. So yeah, there's that.